Good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, October 12th, I think, if I got my dates right. And I'm very excited to be bringing you October's M365 Government Community Call. This is Jay Leask. With me, Jeremy Wood, Sarah Gilbert, Saramy, as we often say.
No.
You sound like the worst superhero duo ever.
I can think of one worse, and I'm not saying it on this call. But with that said, welcome to Tuesday. Welcome to October, guys.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Very spooky October.
I know, I do like it. I do. I brought my Halloween costume. What do you guys think? A little chomp for the road. So unfortunately, Rima isn't able to join us, but we do have an amazing couple of guests joining us for the larger part of our conversation. Today's conversation going to be Sharepoint is still relevant. It's our old friend. It's not gone away. And it's a lot of fun to see the business user-driven stuff getting built on top of it, but it's still Sharepoint after all this time. So before we get there, though, let's talk about the news. I guess that's me, huh?
Or Sarah. You or Sarah.
Or both of us.
Sarah, go.
Sure. Okay, fine. So in the community news, I can talk about we released already the newsletter for September 2021. That's in the public sector blog section. It also has an overview of some of the roadmap notes. So among those being, there's a bunch of release notes that are coming in there, Azure security. There are mentions of proxy shell vulnerabilities and Exchange, as well as live transcription in GCC.
Live transcription. I've been using it this week. It's phenomenal.
Woo! And we also have a new blog series by Brian Turch. And the first of the series is Unified Access Logs. It's a 6-part series about hunting down audit logs and the logs within your Microsoft 365 environment. And it covers how to do it not only for commercial, but as well as, focus on gov tenants. So it's an interesting 6-part series that's coming our way.
I will give our post-production team $5 if they get an animated Elmer Fudd walking across the screen while you do that. Because you said hunting down, and I'm like, yes.
Well, no, because that's like the language used in some of the documentation is hunting down. But it's weird because like even when I first read it, I was imagining like Sean Connery, like the Hunt for Red October, up there, just being like, let's get the logs. I don't know. My accent's horrible. Anyway.
No, and finding logs and being able to parse through those logs can be very difficult. That's why that, like, for example, AvePoint has policies and insights, is bringing the logs together and just trying to make it usable information. So this should be really good. 6-part series on logs. That sounds equal parts terrifying and incredible from a technical standpoint.
Well, and some of this too is, it's a lot of what Wakeman did in the beginning for the blog. It's taking different pieces of information that are already out there, but they're in different help documents, and it's aggregating them all together to one helpful, cohesive behemoth of a post that actually can help walk you through the process.
Yep.
And instead of, having to write it all out, possibly in an email, or find somebody that has all of these pieces of knowledge, it's out there published for you for free to look up and use for yourself. So That's one of the reasons why I like the series like this. Some of these long posts do have purpose, and this one does.
Long posts are great, like when they bring relevant information to the table. So it's exciting to see it written. And I really like the series Jesse Tedoff's doing on the U.S. public sector roadmap. It's taking one out of the Teams blog. That's a terrible name, by the way. Can we just give it a name like, I don't know, Charles? Like, welcome to Charles, the Teams blog. But pulling together the public sector specific things. So just talking about the Teams blog, if you haven't seen last month, there are a handful of updates specifically on government. Specifically, iOS got a lot of play last month. But in the GCC High and DoD, Apple CarPlay, and the GCC High improved content sharing experience, which that experience change was a big deal from a user perspective. One of the things that I was really appreciative of is the new breakout room experience and how it released commercial and GCC at the same time. And then a couple of other things, but do check out the links. We've got them in the chat. And it's like I said, it's nice to see you guys posting the public sector roadmap just like that on a regular basis. So thanks, Jesse, and probably Sarah for making it happen.
Yes, I pushed the button that says publish.
Moving into community events for the month of October. We're already about 10 days in, so we did try to cover everything going forward here. But Jeremy, do you want to walk through some of this?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the events, especially when they are specific to some of the things going on in government. So there's the October 12th event, Defender for IoT in the Cybersecurity of America. That's a Microsoft event that looks interesting. IoT is getting a lot of play in government when it comes to mostly, in the sensors and some of those agencies that have a lot of play in terms of how IoT and 5G is going to come together. So it should be interesting. There's also, let's see here, SharePoint user group on the 14th. I think I skipped one, webinar on the 14th for Microsoft and ExoStar. They're going to talk about secure, compliant collaboration, which was a topic recently for the NARA user group that I participate in. They talked about federal agencies and how they can collaborate. So collaboration is a huge thing, right? We're not the hybrid work and remote work is not going away. So this sort of thing's here to stay. But the SharePoint user group, they haven't announced what they're going to talk about. It's not really government specific, but still, because they're DC based, they have a lot of overlap. Let's see here, October 19th, there's a Power BI users group in DC, same kind of thing. They haven't announced their topic, but once again, all the DC user groups have a lot of overlap, a lot of government people who participate. So there's a relevant conversation around things that are good for everybody. Let's see, October 20th, we have the Washington DC Power Platform user group. This is a big group I participate in. Lots of people here we're talking more broadly the Power Platform instead of just Power BI or Power Apps or Power Automate. They bring in really great speakers to really talk about them and kind of get us excited. So we'll, as we go through these, as I'm talking about these, we'll have these links in the chat so you can find the way to sign up for these user groups or to participate in the user groups. Let's see here. It looks like the Microsoft 365 Meetup for Government. Once again, we're early in the month, and some of them have not announced their topic, but they recently had a session about up your SharePoint game with Power Platform, which was really good, a really good series. So a really good month or meeting. And then the Azure Meetup group is another one that if you're not, it's a government group. So if you're not participating with it, you should check it out. It's October 27th. And late in the month, October 26th and 27th, there's a Cloud Security and Compliance series that's actually in San Diego, but it'll be available for you to see online. And then I added one recently because our next podcast is not till after this. In November 4th, the NARA Microsoft 365 user group. We haven't come out with the topic yet, but our last month, which we just had that meeting this past week, was on upcoming compliance changes in the Compliance Admin Center and some of the new features that are specifically being introduced into the compliance activity targeting government. So that recording will be out hopefully soon.
Thank you for doing that. I forgot about it. I forgot to look for it, but I also don't have access to it because you
don't have access to it. You got to be on max.gov. Yeah,
that's right.
You should do a blog posting on upcoming events.
I guess I should.
Sure.
Hey, we could actually turn this whole thing into a blog post. That's a really good idea, Sarah.
God, it totally is.
If only someone had access to such technologies. Okay. We'll get going, Sarah. We'll get going. In the meantime, Jeremy, thank you for walking through that. My microphone just decided to crash in the middle of all that. So hopefully we've gotten rid of any of my technical issues and the microphone's working now. So let's get moving. Very excited to get into the next part of our conversation. This is the SharePoint portion of our conversation because, this is our 7th episode, I think, and we still haven't talked about SharePoint at all. And it ain't going anywhere.
So fundamental, yeah.
So very excited to have 2 guests, Amie Seisay from Seisay Consulting. Amie's been with us before and excited to bring her back. And also new to the team, Swetha Sankaran, Cloud Architect at Common Securitization Solutions. And Swetha, it's good to see you back in the community. So thank you for joining us. So again, we're going to talk about SharePoint and I'm going to ask you guys, Swetha, Amie, you can fight over who goes first here, but why should our listeners care about SharePoint Online?
Sure. I guess I'll start. Thanks for having me again on this podcast. It's always a pleasure to join everyone. So a couple of reasons why SharePoint is still important. So I strongly feel like a company still needs to have an intranet, the ability for people in the organization to find that authoritative information such as policies, procedures, maybe it's benefits information. So just a one-stop shop for people across the organization to find what they're looking for org-wide. Also, sometimes SharePoint is the way that certain forms collect data and store data. Sometimes that is the way that companies, that is the only option for some companies to store data when forms submissions are being collected. So SharePoint's useful for that. And then also, of course, SharePoint, as was just mentioned, is not going anywhere. It's integrated with so many different apps, such as, of course, Teams with the files behind the scenes. And then you can even leverage that site behind the scenes to add additional apps and add them as tabs inside of Teams. So if you're familiar with Manifest on Netflix, it's all connected. I had to throw that in there.
It's like, what's the motto of Visa? It's everywhere you want to be.
Exactly. It is. SharePoint is sometimes it's in places you don't want to be. Let's be clear. So Swetha, do you find SharePoint still relevant with what we're seeing with Teams and lists and all those new business focused capabilities as a platform? How are you seeing it relevant?
Oh, it is still highly relevant, and it will continue to be for the foreseeable future, the way I see it at least. Teams, when in everything, all these applications like Teams and Planner and everything, whenever we create them, the underlying foundation where the data gets stored is but a SharePoint site. So everything is a SharePoint site with additional caveats like what group gets created when you provision Teams and what else. You get a mailbox, right? But the data is still, the core of your contents is still in SharePoint. So it's absolutely relevant. And it's totally, absolutely 100% relevant. Yes. Teams is great. It's wonderful. It's very, it's the way people get used to Teams is much quicker than they get used to SharePoint. It's mainly because it is the collaboration piece of it, right? It's very easy to collaborate. Of course, you can, the adoption, that's what I'm trying to think of. So adoption is much easier with Teams, and people can spin up Teams much easier. But SharePoint is where the data is, and it will be. So yes, it's relevant.
Yeah, it's interesting. The more conversations I have with agencies looking at SharePoint and Teams and this and that, and they still treat SharePoint as if they can completely lock it down and keep everybody from creating a team site, a SharePoint site collection. They're going to keep everybody in their little pyramid of structure, Here is your department site collection, and that's all you get. And it's like, nah, that's not how it works anymore. You actually have to be more vigilant, more aware of the architecture behind what's happening, than you really had to be in the past, because you could lock it down and say, this is your space. We don't care what you do here. But now, like you said, you create a team, you get a site collection. And if you're trying to secure at the site collection level, you know, you've got to be aware that, hey, this was created over here that you also have to secure. So let's have one of my favorite conversations. I talk to customers all the time about security in SharePoint, and we get through the whole process of our conversation, and then I hear, but what about OneDrive? So, all right, I gotta ask, you know, we can go around the horn if you want. Is OneDrive SharePoint?
I don't.
No.
To me, they're totally different. Like, I get that there's, of course, everything is integrated, right? Like, I get that there's some features such as the copy link or sending of, I get that, or sending of the files, and
Sync.
the message that they get is OneDrive. But I think that it leverages SharePoint leverages OneDrive behind the scenes for some functionality. But to me, in my mind, maybe because I've lived in SharePoint land for so long, it's totally separate, because OneDrive is more of your personal space. Maybe you're sharing a document with one person or two people, perhaps. But SharePoint, in my opinion, is more of, I'm working with a variety of people and they all have access to that information, because if it's in my OneDrive, I'm the owner of it, not all these other people as owners of that content that you can have available in SharePoint. Is that a fair argument?
It is a fair argument. And if you were to leave that organization, what happens to your OneDrive?
Exactly. I think it's it's around for 30 days after the person leaves.
30 days after your license decommissioned, which is why you need a strong backup solution. So, okay, your answer is very much the business analyst's answer. It's, you know, because I look at it from a technology perspective, OneDrive is a solution inside of SharePoint, but you're right. Like from an end user's perspective, my OneDrive is this, my Teams is that, my lists is this other thing, even though the technologists know lists are, it's a skin on SharePoint lists, right? So Swetha, what do you think? Do you talk about OneDrive as a separate app when you're talking to your customers and your business users? Do you talk about it similarly? How do you look at it?
Yeah, you know, I come from technical background too, so to me everything is SharePoint, right? That's the way I look at things. But then when I explain to my customers, just like how Amie was saying, I tell them that it's your personal life. Don't put your draft version in a document library. That's for finished version. You know, keep your content in OneDrive when you're working on them. Only when it is ready to be shared or collaborated on can you know. That's the delineation I try to explain to them. You don't need to work right off of SharePoint yet. That's what your OneDrive is for. You know. So that's the guidance I give people in general. But I see both sides of the coin, right? It's not the same, yet it is the same.
So I've got to stop. That's what you're telling me. That's what you're both saying. I got to stop saying they're the same thing, which I'll take. You know, I don't walk around and assume lists. Everyone's talking about SharePoint when they talk about lists. So I guess I gotta take that too.
Well, would you say that there's a metaphor here, like OneDrive is like your apartment versus SharePoint would be like a common space, you know, like, yeah, you can give some people like the keys to your apartment, but you're not going to give that to everybody, versus shared common space. Everybody has access to it and you're there to play games, watch a movie, whatnot. And it's open to everybody versus your apartment space where you keep some of your stuff that you only allow some people to have access to. Would that be an accurate metaphor?
I like that. That's a great metaphor.
I always like down. Yeah.
From working in tech, I've had to I worked from the bottom up. So I did have to explain terms to people that were not technical whatsoever. And then oftentimes explaining to some of my friends what I do It's very interesting. So I always had to come up with metaphors, and now my mind just like defaults to that. But that's how I've thought of OneDrive versus SharePoint, and have had to explain it to other people, is like, well, one is more personal and they're not really the same thing, because it's, this is more of your space. Yeah, you can give some people the keys to your apartment and, they can go in there, but you're not going to give the keys to everybody, versus the shared, I don't know, game room, I guess we can assume, or like when you guys would be in the old school dorms, how they had that shared common space where you could cook and do all of that stuff. That's what I see more as SharePoint.
Can we please not bring me back to the days of our shared college kitchen that nobody actually cleaned? Dear Lord.
Yeah, and as soon as I could, after I was in the dorms for the first year, and then left after that to my own apartment. But anyways, speaking of OneDrive, is it better that meeting recordings are now stored in OneDrive instead of Stream?
I have conflicting ideas about it. On the one hand, I can see why we want to store our personal recordings that in OneDrive and just use it for ourselves. But then there are stuff like town hall videos that we record that we want to share with an organization. I still like having channels for that specific event or activity and putting them there, which is accessible to all, as opposed to putting them in my OneDrive and then sharing it with X, Y, Z, or to a group. I still like Stream, but that's just my take. I don't know what Amy's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I have mixed emotions. I was excited initially about the concept of when you are meeting with people that are outside of your organization, and you could more easily share the recordings and have them accessible by those people, by those attendees. But there's still some issues where sometimes even the people in the organization, they don't have access to the recordings I've seen. And like, there's a weird, funky permissions issue that happens. So then I have to help people with understanding like how to give someone access, because when they open it up, they don't see like how to actually share it. Like, and make sure that they like going to manage access, and actually making sure that people have the access that they're supposed to have to the OneDrive recording. But I also, this may have been before the transcription came out, but I remember with the one thing I liked about Stream, and I had to switch an organization back to using Stream, was the transcription capability.
Yes.
Able to export out the transcript with the, yes. And so, and I like what Swetha said also about the just having all the videos in Stream versus having them in different OneDrives. To me, it's more, and yeah, if it's like a town hall event, or like, I would want to have those recordings available for other people, and have other people have access to the recordings, if that makes sense. Versus I am the owner of it because I am the person that hit. That's another thing. The person who hit, you just tried. I was like, wait, I just remembered there was a meeting that I would have liked to be the person to hit record, so that I could actually then take ownership of it to actually send it to the people that I needed to send it to, versus someone else who hit record, and then I have to haggle with them about, I need you to give me access, please, so that I can,
Yes.
Yeah, there are 4 reasons why I hate the change. That was one of them. The first person to hit record is the one who gets it. The second is automatic deletion of the video. I think it's after, I want to say 60 days-ish, something like that. They just put a big announcement about that to warn people. Automatic deletion of a video that you may still need. Third, what happens, like we talked about, that person leaves the organization the very next day, their OneDrive is gone. And then fourth, you have to upload it into Stream in order to make the SharePoint web part work to show the video.
Yep.
So why is it not just in Stream to begin with?
Wait,
It really frustrates me.
Wait, say that last one again, Jeremy.
So there's a SharePoint web part for embedding.
Embedding the videos. Okay.
And you need to put it in a company-wide channel and stream to use that web part.
So what I like about the Stream versus OneDrive separation is that Stream now becomes a curated video library rather than just everybody's dump of every meeting they've ever been in. But I agree, it's still too complex of a process for when does it get moved to Stream, who's responsible for that. And absolutely, Jeremy, it cracks me up. If I remember correctly, the meeting, where a meeting takes place, at least at one point in time, was dependent on the first person who joined the meeting. So if a guest joined your meeting, the meeting took place in their tenant, or in their, I'm probably saying it wrong, which is of course terrible, but the same concept of like, if I hit record, but it's not my meeting, it's in my OneDrive, so I get to decide what happens with it. And I think there's still some afterthought actions that need to happen here for this to be an appropriate solution. Now, I get it. By doing this, it's now in e-discovery, it's now in retention policies. Like, there are a lot of things that were technically enabled by moving it, but I do think that from a business solutions perspective, which Microsoft seems to be all about with things like lists and teams being in such the forefront, and Viva now, I think they missed the mark on some of that. I'm hoping we get some good roadmap stuff to further improve the experience.
Yeah, this feature is much more valid if you schedule a meeting in your team. Like if you go into your channel,
right,
schedule a meeting, the video will be stored there instead of a OneDrive.
Yep.
But I have never met anybody who schedules meetings based on those teams.
Oh, and
you're always going to include somebody else. You're always manually putting together the participants of a meeting. It's never that. It's never that, at least in my experience, never that easy.
Did you guys see my video go all blue when I put my hand up here? Like the camera just went crazy. So I did forget, like, I don't remember if anyone mentioned it. Like, the one big benefit that happened when they moved the video recording into OneDrive is for organizations who allow external sharing, the ability to share your videos right away. They didn't have to re-architect Stream to enable this. It was right there. But yeah, I just, it's not the business focused mission requirements now are kind of messed up there.
We can do a whole month just on this topic.
We clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing I do like about it is the efficiency, because my job, I have to do things in a lot of different tabs anyways. So it was just like, it was nice that it was one less tab, because it's like, oh, good, it's in OneDrive now, versus like, while I'm doing my job, it's like, okay, I'm logged into SharePoint, I'm logged into OneDrive. Now I have to go into Stream. Now I have to see who's doing a TikTok dance. Like, I have to do so many different things. It was nice to try to attempt to condense it. So I'm hoping they're making more.
I'm guessing most of our listeners don't worry about who's doing a TikTok dance.
Jay, maybe they will. You don't know. Like, maybe somebody's doing a TikTok dance right now to CMMC. I have no idea. The world is evolving in different ways, Jay.
If they are, you're definitely involved.
Oh, God. Probably. But anyways, moving on to our next question. This is also a big one. Pain points that you see with SharePoint today that your users still experience. And even if you want to address some of these pain points, I think this is an interesting question, because in some aspects, there's, even in my technical background, some people have approached something in a specific way when really the answer was a different method or a different process they weren't aware of, or sometimes wasn't covered in help documentation very well. So here's your chance to answer that and address that, whichever one of you wants to go first.
I can start. So one of the major pain points that we have, I don't know if I mentioned this before, is permissions, the clunky permissions that ended up, inadvertently, not on purpose. Nobody does these things on purpose, but it so happens that permission gets restricted, sometimes even at the leaf node level. And management of such things is extremely difficult. And that's definitely one of the pain points for me personally. The second pain point, I would say, it's like I always have to, it's always striking the right balance between control and sharing, right? How much of it do we need to control? And are we controlling it so much that we're, chasing people away? That's another thing that we have to be cognizant about. And that takes a very fine balance. And I'm sure it differs from organization to organization, right? I used to work for a company before that was all open, anybody can say anything, they didn't care. But not all organizations are like that, and it becomes an issue at that point. The second main point is the confusing thing, especially with SharePoint Online, and this is my opinion, is which direction do I go? Do I go to modern and make everything modern, spend the time to make everything modern, or keep what I have, which is a lot of content, and let my users use it because it is working just perfectly fine? So that's kind of my personal pain point. That those two are the high, top two ones that comes to my mind.
Some of the things I've noticed just at a basic level is people not being aware of the fact that SharePoint has versioning and creating duplicate files and just renaming them with _draft_final. I still see that. I don't know why I still see that happening.
Final.
Yeah. I think it's just around maybe more so like education of people understanding what the capabilities are. And sometimes people understanding what the capabilities are, it could be around training. Maybe there is no training. Maybe there is, no resources. I understand that everyone is ridiculously busy these days. They're just kind of working until they hit a wall, and then they need to reach out to support for some assistance. Sometimes people are kind of clicking around and they're finding, oh, what does this Power Automate do? And, I can customize this form. So sometimes it's around just them stumbling upon features and them getting stuck, and then they need support. And then, what does that support look like for them?
Right.
I totally agree. And that is one of my fear as well, because of, curiosity. I see several items get created, and I'm like constantly wondering who's going to reach out to me when, and I hope they don't use it for something, serious or confidential in nature. So that's always a fear that I have. So that's definitely a pain point I can relate to. Yeah.
And along that same vein, how do you guys convince customers of the value of modern versus classic, or when to go with what for the modern site versus the classic site?
I mean, I would just say don't bother with classic. Don't bother.
Wow.
I mean, because you're going to spend time building something in classic that you're then going to recreate in modern, because it's classic is slowly disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by don't bother.
Let me ask that differently.
Okay.
When you got a customer migrating to M365, because the government still, a lot of agencies are still just in that process, in the very beginnings of that process in some cases, how are you convincing them it's worth taking the time during the migration process rather than waiting until afterwards to start evaluating modern versus classic and what to do with their content?
So
I'm taking notes, Amy. So for those of you who don't know, Amy and I work together.
So let's see. I'm going to say it. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to answer it a little differently, because what I'm currently experiencing is a SharePoint 2013 migration, and I'm trying to convince the client to go just to 365 instead of going to SharePoint 2019, which is what we're doing as an interim solution now for one large site. And the reason why I'm trying to get them to just go to 365 versus SharePoint 2019 on premise is because I'm explaining to them about the hardware, software implications of staying on-prem, and their folks having to maintain servers. You don't have to do that anymore inside of SharePoint Online. That's less headache, less burden on their IT staff. I am also talking about, thinking through their current site structure, which is subsites, and trying to shift gears to, the site collection flatter architecture. And then from a list library classic experience, I am saying that, some of this technology that you may have had, it may not be supported. So eventually it's going to go away. And so if you could spend the time reorganizing information and trying to get it to shoehorn it in, right? But you're going to spend more time later on rebuilding. And the answer to that question is really up to them. But I also start talking about the other benefits of Teams and the other apps that are available. And I even demoed Viva and showing them how they could have that one-stop shop of people are using Teams, and they can have their SharePoint site connected right inside of Teams as well. And even like insights and just showing other apps that are available to them that like, this is what you could have if you were to upgrade to the latest and greatest. So I hope I answered your question, because that was a lot, because I had to throw some other pieces in there about what we're currently dealing with right now.
Yeah, so what I would recommend, and I do, is if it is a new site request that comes to us, and if it is not a custom portal with custom branding and design, and if it is for plain simple collaboration, I recommend modern, and we end up provisioning modern team sites for them with a modern experience. So that's what my recommendation is. So I envision this transition to be slow but steady. Eventually, we'll end up with a flattened structure. That's what I would recommend, because where it is right now, it is all SharePoint Online. It has all the latest features of SharePoint Online. Why would I spend? How many hours do I have to spend to convert all the existing, sites? And is it even worth the effort? Ultimately, it's the information that needs to be consumed, and it is already there, and it's already working fine, and the permissions are all tied properly as it should be. So that's my take on it, at least. Yeah.
I mean, this is so much better too.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I get the argument for modern, especially like, if, again, metaphors, but like, if you think about it, you could have a steam powered locomotive that works, but there's so much effort to be put into it. And if it breaks down, where the hell are you going to find somebody that's going to fix your steam powered engine? Unless you go to the nearest like steampunk convention that somebody may or may not be there. You're not going to find anybody to fix that, versus like, yes, it's going to take you some money to upgrade to what's the newest version of Bullet Train? I don't know. But it's quicker. It's quicker. It's more efficient, and there's more systems that integrate with it. And because it's the updated version, it's also supported if it breaks down, versus that steam powered locomotive. So even
these metaphors are getting off the rails.
Really good. I mean, I think there's the case to be made that if somebody has aging infrastructure that they just can't maintain anymore, they're on something like SharePoint 2013 or even, God forbid, 2010 or 2007, that you could do a bulk migration and then parse it out to modern. But I generally agree, right? The modern approach, modern first, is just a much better approach. And you, like you said, Amie, you get all those extra benefits, all those extra tools that leverage that site.
Exactly.
So I'm gonna switch gears. So considering the pain points you talked about and some of these decisions you're talking about, how are you educating your customers? What's the right way to train them or educate them on these features and these decisions they need to make as they leverage SharePoint?
There is no right or wrong answer to that. I guess it is because we used to we used to train everything. I prepared a presentation deck walking through all the permission and how to set up and how to control inheritance, how to share content with other team members. And anybody who asked for a site, we had to have them trained in how to manage permissions before we hand them off, hand the site to them. That said, there are so many resources, right? We have Persevere, that's the tool that we use, it's the LMS tool, and then we have LinkedIn Learning. There are so many resources. Resources are aplenty. YouTube, people, if they want to learn, they can go to all these different places and learn. So I don't really know if training in person is as effective anymore. First of all, if it is a big group that we have to train, we have to find a time slot that works for everybody. You know how difficult it can get to bring everybody in that same room. So there are certain constraints, I think. But yeah, that's why I think there is no one answer to this. Every company's need might be different.
I think that it really depends on the audience. So I think it's all about roles and responsibilities. So if a group of people who are like content owners and there are features that they need to understand, such as maybe content approval, or I don't know, check in, check out, or whatever you're having people do in SharePoint, then they should be provided training so that they understand all the features that you've made available. And that might be like a one-on-one type of thing, or a group training that's scheduled. I really like, even if it's not in-person training, but just talking to people and seeing people's faces, because I am a trainer. And I like reading facial expressions and nonverbal cues so that I can really understand if they're actually learning and engaged in the content and really soaking it in. But you could also do self-paced, maybe video content. Maybe they can just read information. I really like learning pathways. Jeremy and I were digging through that together. And so there's so many formats and it is about like how the person learns. Some people do great on their own. I get distracted easily. So I probably am better off sitting in a training session because I actually learn better when I'm really focused. So yeah, it's really about the audience.
Okay. I agree with both of you. There's lots of resources out there for your customers. Are you collating some of those resources and providing them, like, who knows, a SharePoint page that links to them? I mean, like, as you said, Swetha, there's a lot of YouTube and LinkedIn Learning, depending on if your organization has access to that. But our users come to us, right? They don't necessarily go find that themselves. So I'm just genuinely curious if you found any success with a method of providing them, hey, where to go.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
We do a lot of lunch and learns in our organization, so that's a great vehicle to communicate, certain or transfer knowledge transfer sessions during those times, and that is quite effective. It's a form of training too, not conventional training, but training all the same.
So I think that what's interesting is that sometimes people, it just really depends on the person. So you can have, and we'll create guides, right? You can have all these lovely guides. You can have, pages with content, instructional text on here, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they'll still reach out to you and say, I need you to help me. No, I need you to hold my hand. No, I need you to, they want to say, do it for me. But you have to, I think that if you are the person that provides support, you kind of have to, help them, but not do it for them if they have a responsibility of maintaining that content. It does take some time, and sometimes you do have to work with them in order to get them comfortable, because sometimes it's a comfort thing where they're scared they're going to break the technology. I've had to resend links over and over again to the same guides. So yeah, I think that it's partly training and helping them, but it's also sometimes it's showing them like what's in it for me, right? So if it's, convincing them that if you store the latest document with the latest changes, then people don't have to come to you as much, emailing you, asking you for this content, then maybe they're more encouraged to actually want to learn how to keep the content up to date. I've had to come up with lots of tactics and strategies.
There's no one right answer. We have to do a whole bunch of different things for different scenarios. It's quite quite an interesting task in itself. You know.
So switching gears, when we talk about intranets, which is a lot of what people use it for, right? Because they are trying to create some portal to find content. What kind of architecture are you recommending? Is it a flat architecture, some sort of hierarchical architecture? What have you found works best, and is there a best practice in that regard?
Best practice, best practice is definitely flat. Yes, because that isn't the case in all organizations. Realistically, it'll be nice if it is. So new intranets will and should be flat. Existing intranets and existing sites, depending on, it's always good if you have the time and the resources to do it. It is always good to go flatter structure so you can manage them easily with regards to permission and whatnot. So that's my take on it. Recommendation, absolutely flat.
I'm going to always love a flat architecture, and of course, metadata, right? Filtering and sorting through information that you tag with metadata, I think is important too, to help. Like, I just think that it's easier for people to see the world, and then you let them filter and sort through the terms that will help them find what they're looking for. We're not even going to get on this topic of folders, are we? We're not doing that today. We're not. It makes me
love folders.
So I realized that you can't, it depends on the organization and their maturity. I'll start there, because some companies can embrace the metadata structure and they're good. There are other companies, they are kicking and screaming and they absolutely need their folders. So I will always give the guidance of keep it at one level of folders if you absolutely need to, and stop there.
Yeah.
And stop there.
And I had to stop here too, because I was like, I'm not going to keep going down that road, because I give you a whole sermon.
Yeah, I mean, I do a series of workshops and presentations on flat architecture, and I guess, going back to Amie and Swetha, what you've both said about converting people into Microsoft 365, like the ideal scenario is get your content flat, get your site collections flat, because that's where all the management is, and get your folders flattened and use metadata. And boy, that's a hard one. And maybe this will finally be the tipping point for me on stopping referring to OneDrive as SharePoint, because OneDrive's totally different. It's an individual's, wilderness of files and probably folders. And heck, even I use folders in OneDrive because I sync it down to my computer and the metadata doesn't matter in that case. But yeah, it is that flat architecture is the ideal scenario, I guess, is the way to phrase it. So when you're looking at flattening things, how much have you guys played with hub sites and hubs, and how do you orchestrate the hubs conversation for your customers?
So, yep. Okay. So, it's an interesting conversation because it's a new concept, and so I try to paint the picture of connecting sites that belong together that can share features, such as being able to search across the different sites connected to the hub. I think that's the simplest way, so that people are not totally confused about what this concept means. Do you have another way, Swetha, that you explain it to people?
I was going to say it's super brand new, and well, not brand new. It's been here for what, 1 year now, maybe a little bit more than that. I haven't combined, so I'm sorry. I have to put my shame hat on. I haven't gotten that yet. That's why I was like, maybe Amie, you should take it.
Well, I think it's interesting. Like you said, hubs have been around a while. In my organization, we've been using modern sites and teams and everything, and we don't use hubs. We actually looked at hubs and said, you can't have a hub of a hub, then why do I want to use it? Because now I have to decide what one hub does this site connect to, and that has kind of slowed the concept of its usage. Now, I think the associated hubs feature that's coming at some point in the future will make a difference. And Amie, I agree with you. And from a search context, that becomes very powerful.
Yeah.
Now, hubs of hubs is coming, right? Like,
It
I
is.
think I've seen that it's coming, at least in the commercial world. So clearly, it'll probably be delayed by about 7 years in the government space.
Yeah, I think our friend Joy just saw it for preview in her test tenant.
You're throwing mad shade right now.
That is shade.
I started this by saying, you know, we're seeing some co-releases, so I'm hopeful. But you know, most of my calls right now are on the DoD side and IL5 and GCC DoD, and it's there's a good size delay there. So I just wanted to be real, maybe a little unreal. I don't know.
That's okay. Realistic. I'm hopeful though. So we've seen a lot of changes happening quicker on the government.
Mm-hmm.
Hopeful that momentum will keep going.
So we had a lot more content to talk about today. And I say content, I mean questions. We were going to talk about search, and we were going to talk about external access, and we were going to talk about all of the I think we were going to talk about the Graph API and
Patterns and practices.
And yes, and patterns of practice. Yeah, so there's all these things we wanted to talk about, and instead we've had an amazingly deep conversation on the questions we've had, and so I want to start by saying thank you. But Swetha, Amie, before we wrap, in the world of SharePoint is still the one. Is there something you want to leave behind here as we wrap for the day?
There's so much more I want to talk about. Like all those things you mentioned, I want to talk about the app bar.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say there's no need for anyone in the field of SharePoint to be fearful of, SharePoint going away, or, it is here, it's here to stay. So it is SharePoint wrapped up in many different skins, so to speak. So I wouldn't be worried at all if I were you. That's it. That's what I have to leave this audience with. Yeah.
A SharePoint by any other name is still a SharePoint, huh?
That's right.
Well, Amie, Swetha, thank you so much for joining us today. We definitely need to schedule a follow-up in the new year and to dig into some of these other capabilities, especially as more and more of the features find their way into the government tenants. So thank you again for your time today. And for everybody else, I'm not going to tell you what we're talking about next month because, as you can see, things change. But we look forward to talking with you in November.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me too. Thank you. Bye.